Hi, it's Gwyn and welcome back to the channel where we explore every gear shift and every guitar lick in Beatles history. Today we're looking into one of the Fab Four's lesser known fascinations, their cars. From their earliest days driving clunky British motors around Liverpool to rolling up to Abbey Road in psychedelic Rolls Royces, Minis and Aston Martins, the Beatles car stories tells a story all of its own, of sudden wealth, changing styles and their evolving personalities. So buckle up as we cruise through the automotive lives of the Beatles, starting from their very first cars to the luxurious rides of their solo careers. Here's a look at the rides they were proud to own back when petrol cost just pennies and Beatlemania was still just a dream. George Harrison was the first Beatle to pass his driving test in March 1962, and his first car? A Ford Anglia 105E, a modest, reliable little saloon car. George loved driving and even once described the freedom of owning his own car as better than being famous. It was painted black and had a sleek design for its time. Paul McCartney got his licence shortly after George and bought a Ford Console Classic 315 from Blake's on Hardman Street in Liverpool. It had a distinctive reverse rake rear window and was quite stylish by early 60s standards, which is very Paul. Subtle, with a hint of flair. This was before he graduated to Aston Martins and Lamborghinis. John Lennon passed his test quite a bit later, in February 1965, but that didn't stop him from buying an old black Austin Maxi cab to be chauffeured in before he could legally drive. When John finally got his licence, he celebrated by buying immediately a Ferrari 330 GT. Talk about making up for lost time. Ringo Starr, although passing his test just months after George had passed his in 1964, Ringo had actually been driving without a licence since 1960. He had failed his test in November 1960 and wouldn't drive legally until the 8th of October 1964. His first car was reportedly a hand-painted Standard Vanguard for which he paid the princely sum of £75, which he soon after traded up to a Ford Zephyr Zodiac Mark I, which was very much admired by the rest of the Beatles. These first cars showed their humble roots and gave us a glimpse of who they'd become behind the wheel. What should be noted, however, was that the Beatles were not as accomplished behind the wheel as they were with their musical instruments, accumulating speeding offences and crashing vehicles to an extent that suspensions were not uncommon. Many of the fines that were issued were not responded to or acknowledged by absence from court hearings, particularly by Paul, who would often not deliver his documents upon request. All four collected as a matter of course parking fines galore, choosing to park wherever they liked and accepting the consequences. Now obviously this was immortalised in one encounter with a ticket issuing lady in Lovely Rita. By 1965 the Beatles were massive stars and they needed cars that matched their new status. That's when the Mini Cooper craze took over. Thanks to dealership connections through manager Brian Epstein and Beatles friend Terry Doran, each Beatle was gifted or purchased a custom Mini Cooper S. These weren't just practical, they became part of their public image, and the Mini was to become the iconic car of swinging London. John Lennon's Mini was sleek and black with blacked out windows. Paul McCartney's was dark green and reportedly had a record player inside. George Harrison's red Mini was later painted in full psychedelic glory by the Dutch art collective The Fool, and is now one of the most iconic Beatles cars. Ringo's Mini was elongated and modified so that it could hold his drum kit. Practical and flashy, just like Ringo himself. John Lennon passed his driving test on the 15th of February 1965 at the Weybridge Driving Test Centre in Surrey, which coincidentally was where I passed my driving test. Due to his appalling eyesight, John was notoriously poor at driving. This culminated in the notorious accident that John had when driving Yoko, Kyoko and Julian on a tour of his favourite Scottish haunts in late June and early July 1969. John, driving a British Leyland Austin Maxi, was navigating a single-track road and, out of panic, let go of the steering wheel to avoid an oncoming vehicle and deposited the Maxi into a ditch. John and then pregnant Yoko took the brunt of the impact, resulting in an overnight hospital stay and collecting stitches to boot. The infamous Maxi would later become a lawn ornament at John and Yoko's home at Tittenhurst Park. Now we go from the functional Maxi to the ridiculous, John Lennon's Rolls-Royce Phantom 5, which is probably the most famous of the Beatles cars. Originally bought in 1965, John later had it transformed in 1967 into a psychedelic masterpiece with swirling Romany-style floral designs. Inside, a TV, a record player, refrigerator, bed and a phone. A rock star's dream ride. Legend has it that a posh lady once hit the car with her umbrella, shouting, "You swine! You swine! How dare you do this to a Rolls Royce?" But John's fleet didn't stop there. As mentioned, John had a Ferrari 330 GT, which is his very first car when he passed his driving test, but he didn't keep it too long. He also had a Mercedes-Benz 600 Pullman and a cherry red Austin Princess Hearst style limo that appeared in his film Imagine. Paul McCartney had some of the most stylish and desirable cars of the 60s and 70s, cementing his reputation as a master of style. His most famous early car was the Aston Martin DB5. Yes, the James Bond car. British, sleek and elegant and perfect for Paul's image. The DB5 is one of the most aspirational cars in the motoring history after shooting to world recognition in the James Bond film Goldfinger. During the Wings era, Paul upgraded to more European luxury, a Lamborghini 400 GT and a Mercedes 300 SEL. Paul and Linda, however, also embraced the functional and drove a much-loved Land Rover Series 3 on his Scottish estate, nicknamed Helen Wheels and inspiring the song of the same name. In later years, Paul continued his understated yet refined car choices with an eye for sustainability, rumoured to have hybrid Lexuses and electric cars in his collection today. However, it can't be argued that George Harrison was the true petrol head. If any Beatle was a genuine car enthusiast, it was George Harrison. He began with a Ford Anglia, a simple saloon car, but his real love was performance cars. He had two Jaguar E-types, one dark green and one silver, which was one of the most stylish sports cars of the 60s. Continuing the theme of having accidents, George had an accident with a Ford Anglia on the New King's Road in Fulham, London. The day after, he was photographed by Leslie Bryce with his new silver E-type Jaguar. He graduated to a Ferrari 365 GTC, one of the most luxurious cars of the era. George would, however, also have a very significant car accident with his wife Patty as passenger on the M4 near Maidenhead while driving a Mercedes-Benz on the 28th of February 1972. This was a very serious accident and both George and Patty were very fortunate to avoid significant injury. In the 1990s, George became one of the very first owners of the McLaren F1, then the fastest and most advanced production car in the world. It cost nearly £650,000 at the time, and George was said to have said it was the only car that came close to being perfect. George's collection also included a Mercedes 500 SEL, a BMW Z8, and a select collection of very rare Porsches. George was also mates with many Formula One drivers and could talk gear ratios with the best of them. George could often be found during the late 70s walking the pit areas at Formula One races around the world. He had many good friends on the circuit and significantly with 3 times world champion Jackie Stewart. Let's have a look at Ringo's car choices. Ringo maintained really the elements of comfort and style with his motor choices. In addition to his standard Vanguard and his Ford Zephyr Zodiac Mark I, Ringo later had a Sunbeam Alpine, which was perfect for cruising the Surrey countryside around Sunny Heights, his home in Weybridge. He owned a Mercedes 600, like John, a sign of quiet rock royalty, and later in life Ringo drove Bentleys and Rolls Royces, but often was chauffeured rather than being at the wheel, swapping the driver's seat for the back seat. While not being a car fanatic quite like George, Ringo always enjoyed comfort, class and the right touch of glam. The Beatles cars in pop culture weren't just for getting around, they were also part of the myth. The Volkswagen Beetle on the Abbey Road cover launched a million conspiracy theories. The psychedelic Mini Coopers and the bus in Magical Mystery Tour showed their counterculture leanings. From their early Fords to £1 million McLarens, the Beatles cars told a story of freedom, evolution and identity. So there you have it, the Beatles and their cars, from the modest beginnings to psychedelic excesses and high-performance elegance. What's your favourite Fab Four car moment? Do you dream of driving George's E-Type Jag or riding in John's Rolls Royce? Pop a comment below and let me know. Let's get the chat going. If you've enjoyed this video, well then why not give it a thumbs up or subscribe for more Beatles content on the channel. So until next time, when we'll be diving into the Beatles solo catalogue again, it's bye for now.